Equipment readiness also includes that the accessories such as soft pad or sandbag, they are ready, they're nearby. And if it is a chest X-ray, the abdominal shield is also nearby and also set to the correct height, roughly the correct height. And over here, of course, the tube has to be centered and the distance correct SID, but of course this is personal preference. Some radiographers, they prefer to set it high up first to avoid the patient hitting head. And once the patient lie down, then we adjust the tube to the correct SID, which is normally 100 centimeters. And this one is also important. When you start any positioning, this bucket tray should be roughly in the center instead of on either extreme hands. Right. Now, if this is the case, say for this extreme fan, and then we position the patient, all right? After we position, we find that we need to move the tube downward a little. For example, positioning, we find that we need to do some fine-tune adjustment to move the part downward further. In this case, you'll be trapped because you can't move any further down. That's why it's always a good habit to start roughly in the middle, and then later on when you need to do some adjustment, you can move either way. Briefing, or a short introduction to the patient, is something that many radiographers and students will miss. Especially in the BC department, the radiographer will say that it's just too busy, we don't have the time to brief the patient about what's going to happen. But just put you to the patient's shoes. You would expect the radiographers to tell you what's going to happen to you instead of just ask you to get onto the table, do whatever they want you to do so. Now, I'll demonstrate to you a very short briefing. It's like, for example, an X-ray for shoulder. Right? I'll say, 小姐今日要同你照左邊膊頭，啱嘛？一陣咧就會同你擺位，擺位之後咧，如果你痛，你記得出聲喎。咁咧就擺完位之後咧，你保持要好定唔喐，咁好快幾秒鐘咧就會影完㗎啦。Notice this briefing only lasts for about 5 to 10 seconds. So even in a very, very busy department, we can afford to have time to give a very short briefing. Number 3 is alignment. We should always align the patient first before we do the centering. Now let me give you a negative example for that. In the very busy department, radiographers start to do a patient and the patient lying like this. You notice that it's not aligned well. Usually, the alignment may be just off for a little bit, right? But I'll do an extreme example. It's a very busy department. Radiographer want to get it done as soon as possible and quickly ask the patient to lie down here and then do the centering, right? For abdomen, we assume this is abdomen. Now, the low costal. So, center to the low costal. Now, that's the low costal, right? And then align the bucky, right? And then do the convolution, right? And then the radiographer starts to notice that it's not aligned. So what the radiographer will do, now, let me change in light. Okay. Now, see what happened? Now the centering is no longer the low costal. That means I have to move down a little bit to make it to low costal, right? And the convolution may not be correct. Number 4, centering. Now centering is very simple, based on some surface landmark. For example, what we have just demonstrated, abdomen, the centering will be low costal. We'll have to feel for the lower edge of the ribcage. One thing I have to remind you, every time when you palpate the patient, you must remind the patient. Like this. 先生我摸摸位先嚇，如果痛出聲嚇。This is how we should do it. Instead of, without talking to the patient, we just go straight. The other thing is, do it gently. Right? Sometimes when we're in a hurry, we'll be doing something like this, which is too harsh, right? The patient will feel painful. So this is one thing. But what I want to tell you something is very important is, a lot of the body parts is not allowed for you to touch. For example, the symphysis pubis, or the femoral pulse. And there's also one thing is different centers or different radiographers, they have a different degree of acceptance of palpation. Like extreme case, in some centers, when they do chest X-ray, the radiographers will ask the student to use a technique called non-touch technique. This is roughly what non-touch technique is. Say if we are doing a chest X-ray, the patient is not too thin, that means we have to make sure that both sides of the chest is included. What we do is, we pull the gown or the dress, flap it this way. So in this way, you'll be have a better idea of where the rib cages are, the border of the rib cages are. And this way is called the non-touch technique. Number 5, collimation. Collimation really depends on what body parts we are doing. For each body part, there will be preset collimation. That means what to include. And we can refer to the videos or the face-to-face practice learning that we're going to have for the detailed collimation. But the principle is try to collimate as tight as possible, but not to the extent that you'll be missing some parts. And for some case when the patient is not very steady, we will open the collimation a little bit bigger so that in case if the patient moves after reposition and before the exposure, we can still include the body part into the radiogram. Number 6, breathing practice or reminder of breath holding. Before we do the exposure, it's really important that we do a very quick practice with the patient about breathing. Don't underestimate the significance of breathing. At one time, I was very ill and I had to receive a chest X-ray done by my colleagues. When they asked me to breathe in, I find myself taking about 5 seconds to really take a big breath in. But if you don't have the practice, the radiographer might shoot it while the patient is still breathing in. So it's really important. When we do a practice, we know that how long the patient needs to breathe in. The other thing is, for some reason, we don't need the patient to breathe in or breathe out. We just ask the patient to keep still, but at least we should remind the patient that in the moment, you're going to keep very still and don't move, just for a few seconds, and it will be finished. So this reminder is really important. Number 7, exposure making. Exposure making sounds very simple, right? You just press the button and that's done. But the things that we have to be aware is, whenever we do exposure making, we should look at the patient, always. Even in the busy department, the radiologist will be watching the request form or reading something else while doing exposure. This is a very poor practice. Whenever we do the exposure, we must watch the patient. I'll use the example that I quoted earlier. If the patient takes a long time to breathe in, so when you try to press the button, you notice that the patient is still breathing in. So you wait for the patient until the patient has finished breathing and hold the breath before you press the button. Number 8, aftercare. Don't think that the examination finished with the exposure making. Aftercare is always important. It includes getting the patient off the table safely and instruct the patient to either wait outside or leave the department and wait for the call from the relevant department or just wait for the next appointment. So this instruction is really important.